have this image up here at the top above you. And right below it, it says, "We will begin shortly." A couple of logos, so we're very good. It's the same thing in the pocket. We'll have it hang out the outside. Yeah, just in case, because once that antenna starts hitting the body, it starts making squealing noises I can't do anything about.
Okay.
All right, let you run that. And so with the way I set everything up now, I shouldn't be doing any running around. That may die after about an hour just because it chugs through a lot of battery. Solid. Keep thinking on the run.
Is that okay?
I'd rather have you turn in the other direction.
Okay.
Was it comfortable? Did you need me to change anything?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
What are you doing today? Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so,
Leave that up there.
you are on.
I am.
the second part of our Lenten day of prayer and recollection. Thank you for returning to join us for this second half of today's presentation. And this part of the day will be live streamed for about 40 or 45 minutes. Thank you, and Father Lou, please continue. Appreciate your presence with us.
Thank you, Michael. I'm just messing with you. I know it's Thomas. So, picking this up from this morning, so as not to rush off, you know, and I'm not, the point is not for me to meet my agenda, but to meet yours. So, is there anything from the morning that you need to spend a little more time on? We okay with, okay, all right. What I'd like to do is just take a look at, I don't think we'll get through, I usually have too much stuff anyway. It's just my neurotic need to, my idol of being contained. So I'd like to take a look at some scriptural warrants, and I suggested them before today. I don't know that you got that information, but I'd like to take a look at Mark, and kind of like the rubric on whatever Lent, you know, however much more Lent remains, but to see this too into the Easter season, whatever the value is. So let me read this to you. I'll give you a moment just to kind of settle into receiving the wisdom out of Mark's Gospel. It's chapter 1, verses 9 to 13. In those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. And just as he was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens torn apart and the Spirit descending like a dove on him. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him. So you know that story. It's early on in Mark's Gospel. It's the preamble to the public ministry. Who knows why Jesus is there? People out of the psychological arena take a look at this and say, well, the guy's in his 30s perhaps, and he's coming out of anonymity, the North Country, Galilee. What would propel him to take the risk of leaving everything that has been safety to him and security? Some of them say it could be, from what we know of an adult psychology, an adult psyche, I should say, the loss of his father, who, is not mentioned. So is this the absence that propels him? Is he looking for a father figure would be the language that they use, that John would be taking his dad's place. Well, who knows? That's subjective. But anyway, so propelled out of the waters, and you get that Trinitarian piece, a voice, the presence of something coming out of the heavens. What's startling in the story is the heavens, the Greek that's being used, it's violent language. The heavens are ripped open like fabric, never to be repaired again. The heavens are ripped open, and the Spirit now has access to the world. The Spirit was at the beginning of the story in the book of Genesis, acting as the midwife, drawing up the creation out of the waters of chaos. Well, the Spirit is back again with the heavens being ripped open. And again, this Trinitarian presence, a voice is heard, this defining voice. And in the power of the Spirit, setting Jesus on fire, propelling him into the desert. The point that's being made, I want to suggest to you, and it's about wisdom. He goes into the desert to drink in the wisdom that awaits. Yeah, you know, the way we could say it is he's heard a voice. You know, what is he saying to himself? Am I crazy? Am I hearing voices? What does this mean? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for the future? That's what's propelling him into the desert. And this is not about a quiet, peaceful, gentle experience of retreat. You can see that in the story. The desert is dangerous. It's like Grand Central Station. You've got angels coming and going. You've got these wild beasts coming and going, you know, snarling and circling, getting his scent, a threat. So this is not an easy story. This is not a gentle story. So exegetes say what Mark is trying to say is that there's wisdom that awaits, but he has to search it out. It's not going to come packaged with a bow on it. He has to follow where the Spirit leads. And so into that environment of solitude, where he confronts the specter of the wisdom that awaits. But that gift of wisdom, it's not a personal gift. It's not given to him for his sake. It becomes the foundation of a struggle with those wild beasts. Mark has a reason for putting them in the story, in the image. These are wild beasts devouring. They implicate the society out of which Jesus is coming. The inner energies of the social and political structures that are inflicting suffering on Jesus' contemporaries. So the indictment is on the culture, both societal and political. And that's what he's adrift with. In the center of all of it, he's beginning to see what this ordination, if you will, of the Spirit on him in his baptism, what that will mean. So the wisdom that will come from him for those who follow him. So you can see in that sense of the fire that engulfs us, you and I are not meant to be well-behaved members of society. We're meant to be troublemakers in the way that those first disciples were troublemakers. And as educators, gifting the students in our charge to be filled with this wisdom so that they become perpetrators in a society turned inside out for the sake of the promised reign of God. Nothing remains in the advance of that promise. It all evaporates. It's all conditional. It's all humanly constructed, both societal values and politics. It's all under indictment. So it's the reign of God that informs Jesus. And the reign of God coming in the wings, if you will, of repentance and belief, trust. Repentance and trust. Repentance, that things could be better, that things can change, that it doesn't have to remain the same, that I can be better. You hear the language of the Lenten conversion? I can be better. And trust, a code word for believing, which is an action word, right? It's not about the appropriation of a creedal statement, as important as that is. This is about trusting, about going with that trust. If you follow the story to its logical conclusions after the 40 days, after this extended period of solitude, confronting those devouring beasts that are sniffing out yet one more victim, he begins to realize what that voice meant when he heard, "He is my beloved child and servant." Oh, and it's what we hear, isn't it? It's what makes us sons and daughters of God. It's what makes us living temples of God's Holy Spirit. We hear the same voice. Now, those heavens have been ripped open for us. We live in the gift of that Spirit that sets things on fire. But it's difficult. It's difficult because this is about a lifelong process. You know, there's the one beef we have with evangelicals and our sisters and brothers on that side of the tracks. We take issue with them in terms of that singular event, because we see this process of conversion as lifelong. It doesn't happen in a moment. I guess it can, but it usually doesn't. And even with Paul, when he was knocked to the ground, and not off a horse, because the story has nothing about a horse in it, but when he's knocked to the ground by that voice in that light, it takes him a little bit of time. His eyes have to be open by the touch and baptism through Ananias in Damascus. So, and in the scriptures we see when the touch of God comes, what happens? Eyes open, ears open, begin to see past our noses. We begin to see that reality to which God is inviting us. This is all, in terms of educators, this is all that we're inviting our students to accept. A life converted. And not about denominational identity, but a life converted to a wisdom that is here in one's heart. That wisdom, if you will, that divine wisdom that informs the human heart. But again, we're meant to be disruptors. See, the ancient Romans were not wrong. They knew that this was the death knell for their world. That this new crowd, you know, following the trajectory of a crucified Messiah would mean the end of their culture. It took a couple of centuries, but it occurred finally. So, and in terms of being set on fire by the Spirit, so I remember in the 60s when I was much younger and it was out of Vatican II, do you remember people running around with the pie plates at Mass and the big smiles and all proclaiming we're an Easter people? Too simple, too facile, too quick. So taking the time, the trust of this lifelong process that we call conversion into the truth of God, that we hear from that voice in our hearts. We are never done, which is the good news, right? We are never done with this process of conversion. If you think you're done with it, it's going to catch up with you. You'll hit the wall going 95 miles an hour. It is just not done. It takes a lifetime. We are never finished letting go of our false beliefs and ignorance. And isn't that what education is about? Educare, being led out of ignorance, out of the darkness, being led away from the capture of false beliefs, of false stances. So if that's the case, then we are never finished entering the reign of God. That promise of things turned inside out and upside down, and the power of the Spirit that comes to recreate and recreate us. So back to that truth, never done. Never done. Never finished entering the reign of God. It's always just around the block. It's always arriving. And I think that issue of hospitality, being hospitable to the reign of God coming, always coming. Coming with the next stranger, the new visitor. So what do you think about that? Does it comfort you? Does it cause anxiety? Are you thinking back to the chicken and the cookies?
What caused angst with me was the image of the surrounding dangers, beasts, or whatever they were.
The devouring beasts.
You know, with our kids and all that gets in the way of them hearing the voice of God.
All right. So you know what do they have, access to in terms of their anxieties? I know up at Lemoyne, the issue would have been alcohol, drinking, easy enough to get. Although there's a strict policy, it's about self-medication. That's what's going on, self-medicating. So I take 2 Tylenols every night so I can get out of bed, even in the face of my arthritis. But I'm self-medicating. I belong to this culture. I remember back to the 70s and Madison Avenue about, what was it, Bufferin or something, or Bayer aspirin. I don't have time for the pain. So run for the analgesic, run for the medicine cabinet. And I would hear in that, well, what they're saying is, I don't have time to be human. I don't have time to embrace the limitations of what it means to be human. So occasionally I'll stop taking Tylenol to see how I'm doing. But I go back to it because I need it to get out of bed in the morning. But I understand what's going on there. I'm self-medicating. But I'd rather do that than with anything else. So.
When you speak of being disruptive, I think of the term countercultural.
Okay.
And I think sometimes it's easier to not be countercultural. It's safer. It takes time, and it takes passion, and it takes energy to be countercultural. It takes a lot of courage. But it can also be an uphill battle with the culture. Trying to shift the culture from just in terms of, you use the word self-medicating, the need for instant gratification is something we all experience, immediate gratification. And as you say, it takes time. It's a lifelong thing. But sometimes it's difficult to accept that.
Oh, yeah, because our culture tells us, and I don't want to bash this culture, because as a human culture, it's graced. God chooses to find us in this culture. But as a human culture, it's limited. So, yeah. I missed my point. Yeah, to teach these kids that. First of all, that it's okay to be who they are, and it's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be productive. It's okay to acknowledge talents. And it's okay, how do I put this? It's okay to be comfortable in their own skin. And that is so difficult because they're alien to themselves at this point. They're not adults. Their brains aren't wired completely. Life is difficult. Life can be, for these students and for the students up at Lemoyne, life can be terrifying. So out of campus ministry, when I was there, none of the kids were interested in spiritual direction. I didn't have time for that. You know, they're worried about dates and the dance Saturday night and going out with friends, drinking and this and that and whatever bad behavior happens to be popular at the moment. I would get them, they would come in the office when they were in crisis. So it was like, it was a one-shot deal. Life is falling apart. Life is a disaster. I can't deal with life. And so that opened the door, not to fix and not to bandage, but to encourage them to see the fuller picture. Like I said, in terms of the Gospels, Jesus comes and the healing touch of God, what happens? Eyes open, ears open, you get to see and hear around you. It's leverage against the isolation. The greatest fear for us is isolation, being isolated. No one understands. I'm going through this by myself.
The healing touch of God.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike in the Old Testament, you don't have the manifestations of the healing touch of God. We don't see the heavens opening up. We don't see the burning bush. We don't have these physical manifestations. And so it can be a challenge to experience the healing touch of God unless we take time to notice the healing touch of God.
Mm-hmm.
That comes through other people.
Right.
That comes through events. John Paul II once said, in light of God's divine providence, there's no such thing as coincidence.
Right.
And I think it's in God's providence, oftentimes, that we can notice God's healing touch.
Mm-hmm.
Those coincidental things.
Right. Yes.
I was thinking this morning, the fact that I heard that Brian Barr was going to be here, and I haven't seen Brian in years. It's no coincidence that he's here. I believe it's God's providence that Brian and Marilyn are here,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was able to have a reunion with Brian. Gabe was able to have a reunion with Brian, and now I have to process, what is that saying to me? How am I interpreting God's activity in this?
Mm-hmm.
Or how am I thankful of God's providence in this reunion?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's the noticing.
You got to notice, Teresa of Calcutta noticed the dying on the streets and would not allow it. I think, in terms of ministry, what an absurdity. The waste of time and resources, giving the dying a human environment and place where they could die with dignity. Who cares? Or Dorothy Day, closer to home, with the poor, the indigent, the immigrant. Who cares? The tradition has always proclaimed that God cares, right? That God's eyes are focused on the Hebrew term, as you know, anachim, the except for God, the hopeless, the utterly vulnerable, those without a voice. To stand in solidarity with them. But we've caught that. Since Vatican II in our schooling, the institutions, we've somewhat institutionalized it. Service projects. It certainly is a good start. It needs to be pushed further. I don't think I want to say more than that. But you're in the field, so the service projects here really cut it. Is it helping them, your students, kind of digest the challenge of conversion? Is it making them better human beings with eyes opened and ears open? I'm not the one to answer that. I mean, I'm up here so I can ask the question, but that's a safe thing to do.
Well,
Brian?
I was thinking, as you were speaking a little earlier, about the youth, and as Joe made some comments, as far as the openness of our students, it seems to me one thing that we sometimes, in our eagerness to impart our desire to help them, is maybe neglecting the fact of their maturity level, that we're so thirsty to share with them how we've had an opportunity. Can you hear me, Gabe? That we've had an opportunity to look around the corner,
Mm-hmm.
merely because of age maturity. And by the very nature of our field, our profession, our burning desire to share, because we've been inspired. So that's our desire. And as a result, we're always looking for those avenues that we can impart that to our young people. And sometimes there develops a wall of frustration. And it seems to me that if we can cool our jets a little bit and take as one of our responsibilities the fact that it will happen for them, and by being good models of what you're getting at in terms of the guideposts for responsible citizenship, responsible leadership, etc., that is putting in place the proper models for young people to get where they need to go to become what they're going to become.
Mm-hmm.
And that indeed is really exercising our capacity to do what we ought to be doing for young people. And that, I think, can dissipate a lot of the frustration we sometimes get tied up in, is, are we doing enough for the young people? Because I think sometimes that redounds to adding to their frustration.
Mm-hmm.
When they can't find a purpose in life, and they think they should have a purpose in life, when they think they don't have a passion, and they see other people with a passion, and they get all tied in a knot with that,
Mm-hmm.
and they are uncomfortable with themselves. Well, what teenager isn't uncomfortable in their own skin? I mean, that's part of being a teenager. And that's okay, because that's part of maturation. It
Mm-hmm.
will happen. It will happen, but it's not going to happen right at that moment.
Right.
And I think if we're up and about our jobs and doing the kinds of things that will set examples and guideposts for them as they're progressing, and people relax with that, I think that leads to a greater sense of development, security, and nurturing. And that's what I'm responding to what you're
Good,
saying.
thank you. But we're told that it takes a long time for the maturation of a human child. They're not wired as adults until about the age of 26 or thereabouts. So I think for me, I was around 40 when I hit that mark. But I'm caught by what you said in terms of frustration, because as you spoke, I was thinking, well, what causes frustration in me? Well, if you don't get on the bandwagon, You know, if you don't meet my demands, you know, if you challenge my expectations, I can get frustrated. And I think for an educator, the realization of that, and I tell parents this, I would tell educators this, they don't belong to you. They never did. They belong to God.
For sure.
So,
For sure.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me tell you a story. It comes out of the Russian shtetls. In the Middle Ages, a Jewish community. Story comes from one of the rabbis. And he tells the story of coming to the town. He's a young man, his first assignment, and he's all excited about finally performing, you know, all these years of study and training. So, but it's a poor town. It's in the hinterlands. And so after the first Sabbath being there, he gets an invitation from this old couple to come to their house the following Sabbath for dinner, Friday evening for Shabbat. And and he agrees because he's living on his own. He's single, and it'll be a free meal, so he's going. So that Friday evening, he arrives for dinner. And the story is about laughing, which would have been problematic on the Sabbath for these very, you know, strict observers. And so he comes into the house, and they're very gracious with the welcome. And they're getting ready for the Shabbat dinner. And so it's the old man and the old wife, and they tell him about the menu. Going to start with borscht, and which is his favorite. So he's happy to be there. And so they get to the table, and the old lady has to do the blessing on the table, on the meal. And you know the ritual with the lighted candles, and you know, and drawing the light and the heat to her eyes as a matter of receiving the grace. And so they're at the table, and she starts the ritual, but there are no candles. And he begins to think, these two are crazy. What you know, they're delusional. Why is she doing that? And then pretending that there are candles, and there are no candles. And she goes on with it, and the old man, her husband, doesn't seem to be concerned about it. So that this young rabbi is thinking this was a big mistake. Anywhere else for Shabbat dinner, but not here. So, okay, they get past the candles, and he doesn't know what's going on, but she announces the soup's ready. So she brings these bowls of hot water out. And he's waiting for borscht. It's just hot water. And the old couple, are just having a wonderful time with this delicious hot water. And he's thinking, yeah, surely they are, both of them, crazy, both delusional. What am I supposed to do here? Just do what they're doing? So he decides, well, he's not going to rock the boat. He's just doing what they're doing. He's making slurping noises and how wonderful this is, but it's nothing but hot water. So, okay. So the dinner gets done. There really wasn't any dinner. So he's still hungry. And he's concerned because it doesn't seem that they're celebrating appropriately. And his sensibilities as a rabbi are offended, and all of this pretense. And so at the end, there's this blessing, the barakah, at the end of the meal. And so the old man gets up to do this blessing prayer, thanking God for all of it, thanking God for the candles that they don't have and for the soup that they didn't eat. And, but he notices the two of them are just sparkling. They're just so engaged, the two of them together, and he begins to realize what's happening. And what he's been gifted with is the love between the both of them in their old age, supporting each other. There doesn't need to be any candles. And who cares about the soup? They have each other. And that's the lesson that this young guy learns, that they have each other. So for you and I as educators to learn that lesson, we have our students. They may be caught up in pretense and in, adolescent delusion or illusion, and being patient with all of that, and realizing that engaged with them, somehow they're receiving a blessing from us, and the favor is returned. We're receiving a blessing from them. So I just find that a wonderful story about so-called pedagogical relationship. It's about seeing in each other gift and blessing. So it wasn't about candles, and it wasn't about the missing soup. It was about the gift of presence and the gift of caring and the gift of hospitality that brought that young guy to this old couple. So let me connect it with a scripture piece out of John again, chapter 4. It's long, 5-42, so if you have time to take a look at it, it's a wonderful story. Exegetes tell us, actually it's Sandra Schneider's that I know from the West Coast. I forget the religious order she's in. She's retired now, but well known as an authority on Johannine theology. And she says this, she says, if you want a profile of the writer if you want to know a profile of the holder of the tradition of the Johannine gospel, go to chapter 4. And the story of chapter 4 is the woman at the well. She is the one, it seems, who holds the tradition. Maybe she didn't write the gospel, but she holds the stories in her heart and the blessing that she gives to the community. So in the way that the story begins, Jesus is on his way out of Jerusalem, going back to Galilee, and they're taking a shortcut, which no Jew would really take at that time, going through Samaria. And he winds up at the city of Sychar, and the disciples have gone into town to get lunch, and he's sitting at the well of Jacob, well known, because the well of Jacob is where Isaac first laid his eyes on Rebekah. Love at first sight. Some enchanted evening. So the well becomes a shrine. And the story is telling us he is there, not by coincidence. He is there waiting for her. And then there's this little dance around thirst. Who's thirsty for whom? What's really going on here? She's coming with a water jar, and he's waiting for her. And in the way the story spins out, he is the promised spouse. He is the one she has been waiting for all her life. She has had 5 disappointments, wounded by infidelity 5 times. Is she willing to take a 6th chance? And here is this spouse, the quintessential spouse for her, waiting for her. And it's tactile. He is thirsting for her. He's famished, hungry, tired, waiting for her, thirsting. And that engages her. You know how the story spins out. She becomes ultimately an apostle to her people. She is sent on mission back to her town to draw all these people to her newly found faithful spouse. Relationship. You know, in the ancient church, before bishops became middle managers, you'll excuse that judgment, but before they became middle managers, bishops, when they were elected to their position in the diocese, became Peter for the local church. And that was a spousal commitment. They never left that church again. They were spouses. It was this reality of vow that engaged them. That's why in the ancient church we have stories of these bishops that were willing to become martyrs for the sake of the local church. Were willing to give up their lives for their beloved spouse, the church. So you can see in this stuff, you know, the power of human relationship and how God worms God's way into human relationships. And so that story of the gospel from John 4. In contradistinction to chapter 3, you know that story, Nicodemus. So you got Nicodemus coming in the middle of the night, scurrying, you know, in the shadows to get to Jesus after midnight, so no one knows. So this brazen woman, this bold woman, is marching up to the well in the middle of the day, not hiding anything. And the conversation with Nicodemus doesn't work. And he doesn't get it. And he goes away disappointed and frustrated. Only in the witness of the cross will he get it at the end of the gospel. This woman is light years ahead of him. She gets it because she has been waiting for the faithful spouse as he's been waiting for her. So to see the engagement of that in terms of what we do educationally, this is about, you know, a life vowed to the development of our students. It's not just a job. It's about giving what's necessary to lead them out of ignorance and the shadows into the full daylight of God's wisdom. So, what do you think? 1:30. Are we going to 1:45? Is that it? I forget.
We had originally talked about a little quiet time,
Right.
and then reconvening to wrap up.
Okay, so when does the quiet...
For a final ending around 2:30.
Okay, and so the quiet time begins... Whenever. Okay. Then, give me a few more minutes. I'm not done. And you're a captured audience, I think. Let me throw some things at you and just see how you respond to it. Now, I apologize, but it's coming out of my background as a Jesuit, so it doesn't contain all of God's wisdom. Close to it, but not all. So let me ask you, why, as educators, why do we do the things that we do? Let me read this from Ignatius. The thing which shifts out of all our activities that we hope will be a very powerful way enriching the hearts and minds of our students and send them out into lives changed, lives that are better, more valuable, more worth living than they would have been had they not been with us. So the impact that we're meant to have in the lives of our students. And you know some of those kids who come back to see you 10 years later, you know, who I want to demonstrate that they're successful in whatever that means because of you. You know, how endearing is that? And that's why we do what we do. You know, it goes beyond the big paychecks that you get. It's about the impact in the life of these young people. And having eyes and ears open, so contemplatives in action, according to Ignatius, it's not enough to have eyes and ears open. It's about taking that into the marketplace. You know, you as experts in the movement of the Spirit, in the human heart, as you observe it, you know, in students and in parents, in whatever you experience around you. Being able to take that into the relationship with your students so that, again, not enough to be observant. It's what you do with it. The telltale evidence, actually, that you are observant, that you know what's going on around you, and you know what's going on in the hearts and the lives of your students. Freeing them from the biases, from the ignorance. Freeing them from prejudice and ignorance, unexamined presuppositions. Freeing them for something better. Freeing them for the grace of wisdom. And the realization, you know, as Aristotle said, that the wiser you get, you realize the less you know. And that's true wisdom, knowing that you don't know. You know, so inviting your students to accept that this pedagogical project is never done. And let me get finally this piece from Ignatius, actually two pieces. He speaks about cor personalis, the stuff of the heart. It's not enough to lecture in the front of the room. It's not enough to scribble notes on a chalkboard. It's about knowing the heart. What's in the heart of your students? To know them, to recognize them, to identify them in their need. That's what it means to be a professional educator. And then finally, the magis that Ignatius speaks about, and it's about doing more. But it's not about being more active. It's not about covering more bases. It's about the intentionality. Take a look at that. Why do I do the things that I do? And to realize that in terms of magis, I'm meant to do less, but with a better, grace-filled intentionality. I do it for the right reasons. I don't do it for my sake, I do it for them. That's the reason I'm here. That's the reason I see myself as an educator. And hopefully you see yourselves as educators. So, let me just stop there and see if there are any reactions. Any questions, any complaints, any demurs? Anybody got a good story to tell? Any jokes? Let me tell you a funny story, because it's on the tip of my tongue. And it's a Jesuit joke, saying you can use it without giving attribution. But, okay, so there is this cruise ship in the Caribbean, and there are 3 chaplains, a Benedictine, a Franciscan, a Jesuit, and the ship runs into trouble, a hurricane. And the ship goes down. And just fortuitously, the 3 chaplains wind up in the same raft, okay? And they're grateful for it and keeping each other company. But they begin to realize there's a school of sharks circling. And so the Benedictine says, I am jumping in because my founder, steeped in wisdom from the 6th century, teaches that I have to be available to the needs of my brother. So I'm going to jump in. and take the heat, so to speak, from the sharks. The Franciscan says, no, 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 I have to do this. Francis taught us that we had to be about the lives of others, that we have to stand in the way, we have to stand in the breach for the sake of the people who need us. So I'm jumping in. And these two are going at it, and finally there's a splash in the water. And they look, and there's the Jesuit in the water, and he's floating. And the sharks are circling him. And he looks up and he smiles at them. And they call out, you know, Father, what's going on? Why aren't those sharks attacking you? Get ready for the punchline. He shouts back, professional courtesy. I just couldn't help myself. So tell me if you can, if there is something, and there may not be, but tell me if you can, perhaps through the day, what has been most helpful. I know lunch and cookies, and but past that.
Well, obviously, for me, this is the first, in a long time that I've been in the company of the brothers. I'm an affiliate brother, and my dear brother, Richard McAllis, whom I'm very, very close with, has passed. Yeah. And as a result, I visited him on a regular basis. So not having that connection anymore has been a real loss for me. And when the notice came across my computer screen from Patrick, I just jumped at the chance to come up here. And then seeing Mike when I came in the driveway and the beautiful expression on your face and welcoming Marilyn and I, and then Joe, it was just, I mean, just such a wonderful, wonderful feeling inside. And Brother Gabriel here. Have this little bag of medicine with him, so I knew he was well. He looks the same as he did.
He does. He never changes. You never change.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. So
Syracuse Greens.
Is that?
there's nothing that can top that. However, listening to what you shared with us in your very last words, really touch the core of it for me when you talk about touching the heart, because in the LaSallian tradition, that's what Jean Baptiste was all about, was touching the heart of the pupils. And I mean, that's what we're all about, is that extraordinary principle of reaching in and touching the heart and moving in that unique way. Yes. So it just brings it all back for me, and having my lovely daughter-in-law here with me. It's such a moving experience. It's not intellectual, but it is intellectual because it has my mind working and moving. But it also brings so much of the emotional component, which is touching my heart. It's touching my heart very deep and personal in a way that is going to be with me for a very long time. And it just means so much. And I'm so grateful, Joe, for you welcoming us and as always hosting us in such a beautiful, comfortable way, that it just is a great experience. And thank you for your wisdom and your
Happy to do it.
freeness to share as you have. It's been great.
I found myself this morning reflecting more on when I was in ministry and my relationship with students. Whereas this afternoon, I found myself taking your words and applying it more to how it pertains to our community, community life, and you know, especially in regards to passion for that and the spark that maybe we need to grab a hold of a little bit more often. And our superior recently spoke to the brothers and talked about the importance of praying, but also the importance of, he said, brothers, use your feet. And so I found myself just reflecting on that very much this afternoon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you know, my own experience, I live out of community now. But I need to be with the guys, you know, usually on Monday evening for dinner and conversation and, you know, over drinks and just to be with them. Because the lesson is I don't belong to myself. None of us do. You know, it begins at the very beginning. You know, we become human because of those to whom we belong. And that continues through all of our lives. And so, yeah, you know, to realize that whether it's family or spouses or children or friends or community members, we don't belong to ourselves. You know, that's the challenge of this countercultural life in a world where, you know, the quintessential, the premium value is individualization. Thank you.
In my role in my ministry here at CBA, and in my role as president, I don't have the opportunity to interface too much with students. It's just the nature of the job. But along the way, I have become close to, in terms of relationships with a number of students who come to the office and chat, and who confide in me and look to me for counsel, etc. And yet, I couldn't help but thinking, and again, you know, it's my saying that in light of God's providence, there's no such thing as coincidence. And you ask, what did we get out of today? Yesterday, toward the end of the day, I had a rather hectic day with this building project and all that. But one of the students whom I see over a number of times came into me around 3:30, and I was getting ready to kind of wind down, and he said, "Brother, do you have some time?" I said, "Sure, come on in." And we spent about an hour and a half to about 5 o'clock talking. And he was sharing with me how confused he is. And he doesn't know what direction he's going in. He's planning to go into the service after high school. He's looking at service as a profession, military service. He's contemplating priesthood. He's attracted to the married life. But he was just confused. And so I tried to focus with him on a number of things, noticing where God is at. And it came to talking about his own and not himself. I said, I'm sensing that, your confusion is perhaps due to the fact that you really don't know yourself. And so we began to unpack some of that. And we got into that for about half an hour, 45 minutes, about some of his struggles and some of his demons that he's working with. And so during this morning, when we were talking about, noticing God in activities, noticing God in people, letting go, the idols in our life. I couldn't help but thinking about this conversation I had yesterday, and all of a sudden it all came to like, it all melded together. Saying, what I was doing yesterday is what I'm reflecting on today. And so it really made a lot of sense. So I thank you for that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's, yeah, certainly supportive of me, so thank you. Yeah. So, it's almost 10 to 2, so Thomas, do we want to...
Maybe 15 minutes of quiet
Okay.
for people.
Okay.
And then we'll come back, and I know you and Peggy have a continuing prayer
Right.
experience
Okay.
for us.
Okay.
So maybe if we came back at 10 after 2.
Okay. Fine. All right.
And then we'll wrap it up with that.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay, great. Okay, excellent.
How's it going?
Don Kirby, I saw Don on Sunday.
Oh, okay.
He's at the conference, I can't remember what it was. I'm saying, but I invited him to call.
No, that,